Achiklipat yatra hi sarva sattva. Nikaya vedo driktata patita. Yea, by whom? Tattva, truth. Vedai, by differentiation. Adilokanata, the king of the kings. Lokan, planets. Alokan, planets of the lower region. Saha, along with. Lokapalan, respective kings. Achiklipat, planned. Yatra, wherein. He, certainly. Sarva, all. Sattva, existence. Nikaya, living entities. Veda, difference. Adikrita, occupied. Pratita, it so appears. The translation. The Supreme King of all kings has created different planets and places of habitation where living entities are situated in terms of the modes of nature and work, and he has created their different kings and rulers. Responsively, the Supreme King of all kings has created different planets and places of habitation where living entities are situated in terms of the mode of nature and work. And he has created the different kings and rulers. So the purport. Lord Krishna is the chief king of all kings, and he has created different planets for all kinds of living entities. Even on this planet, there are different places for habitation by different types of men. There are places like deserts, islands, and valleys in mountainous countries. And in each of them, there are different kinds of men, born of different modes of nature, according to their past deeds. There are people in the Arabian deserts and in the valleys of the Himalayan mountains. And the inhabitants of these two places differ from one another, just as the inhabitants of the icelands also differ from them. Similarly, there are also different planets. The planets below the earth down to the Patala planet are full of various kinds of living beings. No planet is vacant, as wrongly imagined by the modern so-called scientist. In Bhagavad Gita, we find it said by the Lord that the living entities are sarva gata, or present in every sphere of life. So there is no doubt that on other planets there are also inhabitants like us, sometimes with greater intelligence and greater opulence. The living conditions for those of greater intelligence are more luxurious than on this earth. There are also planets where no sunlight reaches, and there are living entities who must live there due to their past deeds. All such plans for living conditions are made by the Supreme Lord, and Vidura requested Maitreya to describe this for the sake of further enlightenment. So, at the end of the previous chapter, the verse describes how Vidura, the self-realised soul, he reached the bank of the Ganges. So he was given instructions, please go now and speak to Maitreya Rishi, because he can give you all the information that you're requiring. So, of course, this is in Hardwar. Has anyone been to Hardwar? I've never been, but it sounds really amazing. All these great rishis are gathered there. And that's in Uttarakhand, this province in India. And that's the source of where the celestial river Ganges is found, right at the very beginning, before it dissipates all through India. So, and we have an ISKCON temple in Hardwar. Did any of you go to the ISKCON temple in Hardwar? And although Vidura, he was a self-realised soul, it wasn't that he was, an ignorant person or not fully self-realised, but he was a self-realised soul. And still Krishna was giving instructions through Uddhava that you please go and you receive knowledge from Maitreya Rishi. So that's how we work in our sampradaya, of course, the Brahma Madhva Gaudiya sampradaya. and all the bona fide, the other 4 or the other 3 bona fide sampradayas, is that we follow in that disciplic succession. So this is a perfect example of how the instructions are there through the previous acharyas, through the great souls. And it described in the previous verse that although Vidura was a Achyuta Bhava Siddhi, or he'd reached perfection by dint of devotional service, still he was instructed by Uddhava, go to seek Maitreya Rishi. And when I was reading this verse in the purport, I was thinking how even though one may have been a devotee for, now some of us have been devotees 50 years, some of us are just starting out, that in whatever phase of devotional life that you're in, we should always seek to get guidance from a senior. So I personally find great solace in I have my seniors that I go to, Ramaya Swami, my dear friend, sorry for that noise, my dear friend Narayani, and a number of other devotees. I try and build relationships with, and when I have a philosophical question or whether I need some spiritual guidance, I go to these wonderful devotees. So we should always try and cultivate that idea of finding a mentor. We have mentees for our new devotees, but all of the senior devotees, they also need to seek out that person that they can give confidential revelations to, and that they also can be given advice in confidence. It's really, really important. So it's not that you think, okay, when I'm a new Bhaktin or I'm a new Bhakta, I have my mentor, and then, I get initiated and get Brahmin initiation, etc., then I don't need that. No, we all need it. And something that I've been thinking about lately is also pastoral care for leaders and managers, that we all need to get that, find that person or persons who we can trust and who can help guide us in our spiritual life. So here we can see that Vidura, such an elevated personality. He was Yamaraj in his previous life, great devotee doing great service for Krishna, and yet he's seeking guidance from Maitreya Rishi, and of course previously from Uddhava. So here we have a perfect exchange. We've got 2 self-realised souls, and he's asking the perfect questions. So he's not wasting time in frivolity, he's asking very direct questions. So all throughout Srimad Bhagavatam, there are different pastimes that can really inspire us in how there's this exchange of confidentiality, of spiritual guidance. And, it's also teaches us the methodology of devotional service, how we practice devotional service. We can see by example of great devotees, we can see by example of new devotees, that actually that desire to serve Krishna is very inspirational. Like the kirtan we had this morning, so inspirational and so wonderful to see so many young devotees or younger devotees got all that enthusiasm, that great dancing ability, which I also had at one stage, but now I just admire from afar. So it's very important that we develop those relationships, and those relationships are developed over time. But don't think that you don't need it. You do. We all need it. And even if we've been devotees for a long time or aspiring devotees for a long time, we need to find that person or persons who can help guide us, because we all need it, no matter what stage of life we're at. And of course, Bhagavatam is our life and soul. In a lecture I was listening of Prabhupada's the other day, Prabhupada said, Srimad Bhagavatam is our life and soul. So we dive into that nectar of Bhagavatam when we're here in class, and we dive into that nectar of Bhagavatam when we're sitting in our ashram room or in our homes, on the farm, off the farm, that Bhagavatam is giving us the backbone, actually. It's giving us the backbone where we can perform our devotional service carefully and solidly. Of course, chanting our 16 rounds, following the 4 regulative principles, they are critical. But reading Prabhupada's books, studying Prabhupada's books, especially Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, this is very, very important. It gives us a really strong basis in our devotional life. And, as you reread, you'll notice that, oh, I missed that. How come I missed that when I read it the first, second, or whatever time? And it's because we're getting more and more realizations as we continue. And our senses are becoming a little more fine, and we'll go, oh, wow, that was a really amazing thing that Prabhupada said, and I didn't see that before, I missed it. So it's very important. And we're able to hear properly by following the regulative principles. Purity is the force. And when we follow the regulative principles strictly, then our ears become more finely tuned. And in a letter to Vibhavati in 1969, Prabhupada talks about raising good leaders and listeners. And I'll just read out this short letter. And to raise such men of character, there must be the 4 regulative principles, namely, no illicit sex life, no meat eating, no gambling, and no intoxication. According to Vedic civilization, these 4 principles must be followed by persons desiring spiritual advancement of life, persons who want to be public leaders, and persons who want to be highly intellectual for understanding God and His creation. And Prabhupada adds, and I thought this was a very charming conclusion to the letter, and Prabhupada adds, so I'm very much hopeful of Mr. John Lennon because he has several times chanted the word Krishna. I thought that was very sweet, Prabhupada's concern there. So without that purity, Maya can very easily distract us. And perhaps we might have had a bit of a shoddy japa period. We've been distracted. Our chanting's been a little less focused. And you can feel the difference. For example, when you come to the morning program, you're there at Mangalarti, you come for the morning program, you're there for kirtan and class. By the time you finish prasadam, you feel very vitalised. You feel ready to face the day. But when you've, perhaps not been able to sleep or something, you get up a little bit later, 5 o'clock, 5:30, everything's all a little bit, out of whack, so to speak. So this program, and especially when you're young, you've got younger bodies, there's no reason that you can't attend all that full program. And it really gives you the strength to go on. That 20, 30, 40, 50 years, 60 years later, you're still doing the same thing with enthusiasm. So that's our key, how to remain enthusiastic. And so, what is really our goal? Obviously, our goal is to understand who we are, what our relationship is with Krishna, and that Jive Swaruphoy Krishnira Nityadas, that we're eternally the servant of Krishna. No one actually really loves being a servant. They like to be served. But actually our position is to serve. And when we accept that, we get great joy from doing that service. And what to speak of, serving our God family, when we're serving the spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada, of course, and Krishna, that gives us very great enthusiasm. And we actually get to that point where we're all trying to developing that pure love of God. And in the previous chapter, the previous verse, Vidura's first question to Maitreya Rishi was, how should we live for real happiness? So we all seek happiness. That is our natural position, to be happy. We don't want to be miserable. When we're miserable, we're going to the psychologist, or we're taking antidepressants. Or we don't want to be unhappy. That's not our nature. Our nature is Ananda. So this was Vajra's very first question for us, the answer. How should we live for real happiness? And this was that, with that mood of this devotional service would be to please Paramatma, and that he would impart knowledge of the absolute truth through realisation. And of course we can't speculate and think, no, Paramatma told me to do this. Often we can get a very strong intuition, and I firmly believe that is Paramatma. Paramatma is knocking on the door going, hey, what about this? But we can't presume that, some mental speculation we might have is Paramatma. It's not a cheap fix. So it's not that we suddenly expect that we'll get direction directly from Krishna in the heart. But he is there and he is witnessing. And I'm sure most of us have had, if not all of us, have had some experience where Paramatma is speaking to us. I know I've had personal experience of that, where being given really strong guidelines, don't go that way, don't go that way. And then my intellectual mind will go, no, it doesn't matter which way I go, because whatever way, depending on my karma, or depending on how Krishna wants me to be purified, it will happen. And then one very fateful morning in Mayapur, I had these very strong warnings. Don't go on that road. Turn on the other road. Don't go on that road. Turn the other road. And I didn't listen, and I got in a very bad accident. A motorbike, very big motorbike, travelling at high speed along Little Bhaktisiddhanta Marg, went wham into my push bike. And I broke 2 ribs. But by Krishna's grace, I hadn't passed. It could have easily happened. And there was very strong instructions that I wasn't listening to. So when you do get those instructions, do listen to them. It's very important. And then, so in the previous verse, Vajra is asking about all the different incarnations. I'm just putting us in a bit of context here. And he talks about the brahmanas, the cows, and the demigods. And yesterday Ramai Maharaj spoke a lot about the cows and how important the cows are to human civilization, how important milk products are. And Prabhupada states that the cow is the most important animal for developing the human body to perfection. So it's essential. Prabhupada would often tell us, drinking hot milk, very hot milk, not cold milk, drinking very hot milk actually creates that finer brain tissue. And what's that finer brain tissue for? It's for advancing in spiritual life. It's giving us that intelligence that we can begin to appreciate that we're not here just to exist, get born, get diseased, get old, and then die. We're here for a specific reason, which is to develop our love for God. So that hot milk is very important. And one time Prabhupada's servant gave him hot milk, but it wasn't very hot. And Prabhupada sent it back. He said, no, it has to be very hot. And then, of course, in their over-enthusiasm, they heated the milk till it was like boiling, and then gave it to Prabhupada. And Prabhupada, I forget exactly what Prabhupada said, but it was something quite humorous. He said, hot, but not so hot that you can't drink it. So this verse 8 describes the variety of existence and creation. And after all, variety is the mother of enjoyment, isn't it? We all like something different, like to wear something different, like to sing a different tune, like to eat different prasadam. Luckily here in ISKCON we have a multicultural environment, so we get different cuisines, Italian, Indian, Asian in our prasadam. So in other words, Krishna, he's created a bespoke or customised creation for the living entities. And that's according to their modes. whether of goodness, passion, or ignorance. So because of our desires, Krishna has manifested all the different bodies that fulfill those desires. So where we live, what kind of place we live, whether it's in the icelands, whether it's places where there's no or very little sunshine, like in certain parts of Eastern Europe, Sweden, those places, dark for many months of the year. And I remember that one time I went to England and I couldn't believe it. At 10 o'clock at night it was still sunlight. Very hard putting children to sleep when it's 10 o'clock at night, but it's bright light. And then of course in the winter it's dark a lot of the time. And it reminded me of that, when I was in my working life in Sydney, when I was a custom publisher. And custom publishing means that you create a publication for a particular company to show their product off in the best way possible. So you go to the client and you're pitching the argument with them. We can create a magazine like this and it will showcase your company, your blue chip company and all your products, and in that way you sign a $1 million contract. So that's customized or bespoke. It's particularly geared at that particular company and their particular product or products, whether it's a car or whatever. So Krishna has created this for us, all customized to exactly what our inner desires are. So, Prabhupada in Gita explains that there's 8,400,000 species of life, all very, you just have to watch a bit of David Attenborough and you realise this creation is so phenomenal. And the variety is really amazing. But this material manifestation is only 1/3 of the creation. Where a universe has so many planets in it. So all of you who are cooks, you know how tiny a mustard seed is. So you can imagine a bucket full of mustard seeds, and that's the number of planets in one universe. Cannot conceive. So all of these planets, these universes, they're all customized. They're all created specifically for us. Then we have to make sure that we utilize it properly. And Prabhupada, in an essay Prabhupada wrote, he says that our planet Earth is just like a moving railway compartment. So you have your first class sleeper, you have your, third class sitting up all night, you have your middle class where you can, maybe squish in there, but you can't really lie down to sleep. So these are all different classes that we're all fitting into. So sometimes we're in a first class body, other times we're in a second class body, other times we're in a third class body. So we're in, animal life. Animal life, you can't understand spiritual matters. Human life, demigod life, of course in demigod life your spiritual consciousness is much more awakened. Human life, well, sometimes we're dull, sometimes we're woken up, or woke is a common terminology. So it's all in accordance with our karma. So we're in this. I really like that example Prabhupada gave of that train compartment with all the different carriages and all the different levels. But Prabhupada continued in that essay that our aim should be to reach the destination, and that the train compartments are never meant for our permanent home. We cling very tightly to our bodies, to our family, to our friends, but when we're faced at that crucial moment, then all of those things don't matter. All that matters is what we're thinking of. And I think this morning a godbrother of mine, Sahadev, he passed away in Mayapur, and very auspicious I saw a video of him just before he left his body, and he was surrounded by devotees chanting. He was covered in a namaboli, or the names of Krishna there. He had a very auspicious passing, and I could see his lips were moving. I think he was chanting Hare Krishna. So, at that end, that's why it's important that our life is a preparation for that end. I know it sounds a bit depressing, always thinking about death, that is our final test. So we can be joyous but still understand that this railway carriage is not our permanent destination. We have to get off at some stage. And unfortunately, leaders these days, they are not spiritual leaders. They're not giving us spiritual guidance, even in what they're meant to be responsible for, the upkeep of the citizens. They're completely hopeless. And we all know how everything is so expensive these days. It's just getting more and more and more expensive. We'll soon be riding bicycles because we can't afford petrol in our cars. Or we'll have to do what do they call it? A car, car system where you pick up a number of different people and they share in the petrol?
Car share.
Car share. Yeah, we have to do something like that. And another point in this purport that was really interesting, where Prabhupada's explaining that everywhere is populated. And has anyone ever left from Calcutta Airport at 1 a.m. in the morning driving to Mayapur by taxi? Those who have you ever seen that it's completely deserted? No. You're driving in the car at 1 a.m. in the morning in rural India where there's no lights and there's people walking along the roads. I don't know where they're going, maybe leaving very early to go to a market or walking to the next village for a wedding, I don't know, but there's always people on the road, walking or on a push bike or on a rickshaw, even at 2 a.m. in the morning in India. So it reminded me that it's like our planets. There's entities populating all the planets, just like you'd think, there's no one going to be around at 1 a.m. in rural India in a deserted road, but no, there are. And they don't even have torches. I don't know how they can see. So Brahma, he enters into the whirl of the lotus and he divides the planetary systems, the 14 planetary systems, into upper, middle and lower. We're in the middle. We're on the 7th level called Burloka. And Prabhupada describes this very nicely in 2nd Canto, chapter 5, verse 40. I'll just read it out because I thought it was very interesting. Modern enterprises, the astronauts who travel in space, may take information from Srimad Bhagavatam that in space there are 14 divisions of planetary systems. The situation is calculated from the earthly planetary system, which is called Burloka. Above Burloka is Bhuvarloka, and the topmost planetary system is called Satyaloka. There are 7 upper planetary systems and there are 7 lower. Does anyone know any of the names of those? Say again?
Mahaloka, Janaloka, Tapaloka.
Yeah, very good. There's Tala, Rasatala, and the Patalokas, 7. And these planetary systems are scattered over the complete universe, which occupies an area of 2 billion times 2 billion square miles. So that's the area of the planetary systems. And then Prabhupada says, therefore, their attempt to travel in the sky is something like child's play on the shore of an expansive ocean. The higher planets are not visible to us. And of course, the demigods, they live in a different dimension to us. So even if the moon planet was landed on, Prabhupada says that they didn't land on the moon, they went to Rahu. But even if they did, they couldn't see all the denizens there. And then in Yamaloka, half of that is where the living entity is punished, And then the other half of Yamaloka is called Pitriloka. And that's where Yamaraj changes his form. And he has a very beautiful form. I found that very interesting. And as we know, Vidura was Yamaraj in a previous verse. And there's one great Muni, Mandaka Muni. He had been accused of sheltering a criminal in his ashram. And he said, I didn't know about that. He's just there. I'm just doing my jagya and my sadhana, and I don't know who this is. But anyway, he was going to be punished. And he was going to be punished by being tied to a stake and pierced by all the sharp lances of the soldiers. Then at the last minute, the king gave him a reprieve. So Mandaka Muni was pretty upset about that. So he went, because he felt he was innocent. So he went to Yamaraj to lodge a complaint. Yamaraj, what's the story here? I didn't do anything. I didn't know anything about this criminal who was hiding in my ashram. Why did you punish me in such a terrible way? He didn't actually get pierced, but all that stress and anxiety that any second I'm going to have all these lances piercing my body. And Yamaraj said, 1 minute. When you were a little child, you were piercing insects with a straw. And therefore, that is your punishment. And Mandaka Muni said, 1 second, I was just a child. I didn't know what I was doing. So then he cursed Yamaraj that you have to take birth as a Sudra. And Yamaraj decided to wait until Krishna was going to be on the planet, and then, he took birth as Vidura. And so he also cursed that any child up to 5 years old, the parents have the responsibility. So you've got to make sure that your children aren't, hurting any frogs or insects, because you'll get the karma for it. So you've got to supervise your children very, very much. And then, of course, we know the story of and I won't go into it now because time's running out, but Vidura, how he was born as the son of a maidservant, hence that Sudra birth, but born in the palace of the king. He was his parents were Santanu and Satyavati, and then she had, grandparents, she had asked that because her son Vichitravirya had died prematurely without any heir, so then the wives were, in those days it was acceptable that if the husband wasn't there to beget children, then the brother could. And Vyasadeva was born to Satyavati in a previous relationship. So when it came the turn of one of the wives to beget a child with Vyasadeva, because Vyasadeva was such a ferocious, scary-looking, even though he was the incarnation of Krishna, he was so ferocious, big matted hair and very scary-looking. She didn't go, she sent her maidservant instead, and therefore Vidura took birth in that way. But that's just technically he was classified as a Sudra by birth, but raised in the palace. So, each planet has its own specific way of running, with its own, atmosphere, and all of the living entities that are in those planets, they have bodies to suit that atmosphere. So on the Sun planet, they have fiery bodies. And I read something interesting. Before I say that, Krishna has created this very nice balance with very nicely balanced ecosystems. But we really mess that up. We mess up our ecosystem by our greed and our avarice. And and there was another thing I read where one day Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati, this was about 1905, he was on a walk with some of his disciples, and he was looking intensely at the moon, and his disciples were, Guru Maharaj, what are you looking at, Srila Prabhupada? And he said, I can see that the denizens on the moon planet are developing some materialistic tendencies. So we must go there to preach. But there's a very great interest in the moon now with helium-3. So the moon has its own atmosphere, and we want to get some of that because it's going to, it's clean energy. We can extract it, bring it down. Of course, it's going to create even more imbalance. So, for example, in the 1800s, they decided, let's introduce the cane toad because there's a very, terrible beetle that's destroying all the cane, the sugar cane in Queensland. So they introduced the cane toads, and then naturally the cane toads took over and they poison all of the native animals because the native animals think, oh, here's a nice juicy frog, I'll eat it. But it contains poison. And then, of course, they spread. So now they're going to all the different states. So there's always some counterbalance. And it explains in Bhagavatam that when you try and enjoy, the level of enjoyment may be here. But the karmic reaction for that enjoyment isn't here, it's here. So there's always that imbalance. You think you're going to enjoy certain things, and your reaction to that enjoyment, I'm talking about, sinful enjoyment, that is not the same. You really get walloped. The balance of karmic scales is not fair. It's much worse, much worse. So, they're trying now. Last year, there was the Chinese Chang 5 mission, and they returned some of that helium-3 to Earth. And that can actually, it's so tiny, that very small amount, but it can generate power for whole cities. So they're very much into helium-3 at the moment. So it's, clean energy, it's non-radioactive, and you can look it up, it's very interesting. But it's all based on money, greed, and a lack of concern about the balance. There's always this imbalance. So no doubt there's going to be some repercussion to that. I don't know what it is, but no doubt it will be a repercussion. And another example was in 1859, the Europeans decided to import rabbits. It's because they wanted to shoot the rabbits for sport. So they imported all these rabbits. Australia didn't have rabbits before that. So then within 50 years, rabbits had spread all throughout Australia. And if you happen to live in Queensland and you want to keep a rabbit, be prepared for a $30,000 fine, because what the rabbits do is they burrow and, create holes in the ground, and you can't grow crops, etc. And they have devastating implication for Australia's flora and fauna. So this is all pointing to the fact that there's a balanced ecosystem that Krishna's created. Through our various desires, we'll get particular bodies to suit those desires, but our goal is to get out of the train, reach our destination. So just to recap, some of the main points we discussed was the perfect listener and the perfect answerer, the person to ask the questions of, and how we incorporate that in our own lives by following the regulative principles, by purifying our characters. And just this morning when I was getting ready for Mangalati, I was listening to a Prabhupada lecture, and Prabhupada was saying, build character by getting up early. He said, that's how you build character. You get up early. So all of the austerities that we may perform, they're actually building our character. It's not just because, the temple president, if I don't go to Mangalati, he's going to get on my case, he's going to tell me I can't stay in the ashram, or, someone's going to say, I haven't seen you for a while. But actually what it's doing is it's building our character. And why do we want to build our character? We want to build our character so we can perform devotional service strictly and for a long, long time. Not just, in our 20s or 30s, but going up for as long as we have in this material body. So, finally, how customized the creation is, how Krishna has arranged everything so beautifully, and all the different species of life, the aquatics, there's a certain amount, there's the animals, a certain amount, etc. And then we talked about the ramifications of not following the natural order of things. So thank you very much for listening so patiently. And if you have any questions, comments, feedback, please put your hand up. And if I can't answer them, Ramaya Swami's here so he can answer them.
What did Prabhupada say about hot milk again? That was interesting.
1 minute, we'll just get a microphone. It's just this goes on, published on the internet, so if I can't hear what you're... And we always have trouble with the microphone. So maybe I could, if you say it again louder and I'll repeat it.
What did Prabhupada say about hot milk?
What did Prabhupada say about hot milk?
Yeah.
Right, so Prabhupada said hot milk and milk drunk hot develops the finer brain tissue so that it enables us to more easily understand spiritual matters. It wakes us up, that finer brain tissue. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Jai, glories to Srila Prabhupada.